"Mr. Whitmore, over here. Is she worth the scandal?" The shout cuts through the rain like a blade. Flashes explode across the front lawn of Whitmore Estate, white bursts of light against the dark Virginia sky. The iron gates stand open, and beyond them, chaos, reporters pushing, cameras lifted high, microphones stretching forward like weapons. Rain drips from the stone columns, soaks into the gravel driveway. The sound of it mixes with the clicking shutters. Inside the black town car, Sanaa doesn't move at first. Her hand rests lightly on the door handle. Still, Adrian exhales slowly beside her. Not sharp, not angry, just steady, controlled. "Well," he mutters under his breath, almost to himself, "I suppose privacy was temporary." Another flash. The driver turns slightly. "Sir, we can circle around." "No." Adrian's voice is calm, too calm. He reaches for the door. Sanaa's fingers tighten slightly. Not fear, just awareness. "Adrian," she says softly, not stopping him, just checking him. He looks at her, and for a brief second, there's something unguarded there. Not the billionaire, not the public figure, just a man. "Are you ready for this?" he asks. She studies him. Rain streaks across the window between them and the shouting crowd. Her reflection stares back for a second, composed, chin lifted. "I've been ready," she says quietly. He nods once. The door opens. Noise floods in. "Sir, is this a midlife crisis? Are you funding her career? Miss Brooks, how long has this been going on?" The rain soaks Adrian's coat almost instantly. He steps forward, shielding Sanaa slightly without making it obvious. Instinct, not performance. A reporter leans in too close. "Mr. Whitmore, do you regret being seen with a woman half your age?" That one hangs in the air. The crowd quiets just enough. Sanaa doesn't look at the reporter. She looks at Adrian, waiting. He removes his glasses slowly, wipes rain from them with controlled precision, buys himself a breath. "Well," he begins, voice even. "If feeling alive again is a regret," he pauses. A camera clicks. He continues, quieter now, firm. "Then I've wasted 10 years. Murmurs ripple through the crowd. Sanaa's jaw tightens, not from embarrassment, from something else. Recognition. Another question flies. "Is she using you?" This time Sanaa speaks. "No," she says. Clear. Steady. No tremble. "I don't need to." Silence. Just rain. Adrian glances at her. And for a moment, just a flicker, pride warms his eyes. He places a hand lightly at her back. Protective, not possessive. "Good night," he says to the reporters. They walk through the gates together as flashes chase them. The doors close. The shouting fades. Rain keeps falling. "Mr. Whitmore, over here. Is she worth the scandal?" The shout cuts through the rain like a blade. Flashes explode across the front lawn of Whitmore Estate, white bursts of light against the dark Virginia sky. The iron gates stand open, and beyond them, chaos. Reporters pushing, cameras lifted high, microphones stretching forward like weapons. Rain drips from the stone columns, soaks into the gravel driveway. The sound of it mixes with the clicking shutters. Inside the black town car, Sanaa doesn't move at first. Her hand rests lightly on the door handle. Still, Adrian exhales slowly beside her. Not sharp, not angry, just steady, controlled. "Well," he mutters under his breath, almost to himself, "I suppose privacy was temporary." Another flash. The driver turns slightly. "Sir, we can circle around." "No." Adrian's voice is calm, too calm. He reaches for the door. Sanaa's fingers tighten slightly. Not fear, just awareness. "Adrian," she says softly, not stopping him, just checking him. He looks at her, and for a brief second, there's something unguarded there. Not the billionaire, not the public figure, just a man. "Are you ready for this?" he asks. She studies him. Rain streaks across the window between them and the shouting crowd. Her reflection stares back for a second, composed, chin lifted. "I've been ready," she says quietly. He nods once. The door opens. Noise floods in. "Sir, is this a midlife crisis? Are you funding her career?" "Miss Brooks, how long has this been going on?" The rain soaks Adrian's coat almost instantly. He steps forward, shielding Sanaa slightly without making it obvious. Instinct, not performance. A reporter leans in too close. "Mr. Whitmore, do you regret being seen with a woman half your age?" That one hangs in the air. The crowd quiets just enough. Sanaa doesn't look at the reporter. She looks at Adrian, waiting. He removes his glasses slowly, wipes rain from them with controlled precision, buys himself a breath. "Well," he begins, voice even. "If feeling alive again is a regret." He pauses. A camera clicks. He continues, quieter now, firm. "Then I've wasted 10 years. Murmurs ripple through the crowd. Sanaa's jaw tightens, not from embarrassment, from something else. Recognition. Another question flies. "Is she using you?" This time, Sanaa speaks. "No," she says. Clear, steady, no tremble. "I don't need to." Silence. Just rain. Adrian glances at her, and for a moment, just a flicker, pride warms his eyes. He places a hand lightly at her back. Protective, not possessive. "Good night," he says to the reporters. They walk through the gates together as flashes chase them. The doors close. The shouting fades. Rain keeps falling. The mansion doors shut behind them with a heavy thud. Silence, not complete silence. No, the rain still taps against the tall windows. A faint echo of thunder rolls somewhere far across the Virginia hills. But compared to the chaos outside, this feels almost unreal. Sanaa steps out of her heels near the entrance. The marble floor cool beneath her bare feet. She doesn't speak immediately. Adrian removes his coat slowly, hangs it carefully, too carefully. His movements are precise, controlled, measured. But his hands linger just a little too long on the hanger. "Well," he says finally without looking at her. That escalated quickly. She lets out a soft breath that almost sounds like a laugh. "Almost. It was bound to happen," she replies. He nods once. Another pause. The distance between them in the foyer feels wider than the front lawn did minutes ago. She studies him now, really studies him. "You hesitated," she says gently. He looks up. "When?" "When they asked if you regretted it." He opens his mouth, closes it. He walks past her toward his study, not dismissing her, just needing space. She watches him go, expression unreadable. Inside the study, the fire has burned low, embers glowing faintly. The room smells like old books and smoke, and something heavier tonight. Adrian pours himself a drink, stops halfway, sets the glass down untouched. His reflection stares back at him from the dark window. Rain streaks distort his face. He exhales slowly. "For 10 years," he murmurs, barely audible. 10 years. He presses his hands against the edge of his desk, shoulders tight. "I built empires, expanded portfolios, sat through endless meetings where nothing meant anything." His voice drops. "And I felt nothing, a beat. I met her, and suddenly I can't even control my own pulse." He laughs quietly, but there's no humor in it. Upstairs, a floorboard creaks. He straightens slightly. His voice shifts now, softer, almost unsure. "Is that weakness?" he asks the empty room. "Or is that being alive?" Silence answers. His composure cracks, just slightly, not dramatically, just a thin line in armor. He presses his fingers against his temple. "I don't know how to do this," he admits under his breath. A man who negotiates billion-dollar acquisitions doesn't know how to stand in front of cameras and say he loves someone. That realization unsettles him more than the reporters did. Upstairs, Sanaa stands near the balcony, overlooking the foyer. She heard part of it. Not everything, but enough. She doesn't interrupt. She doesn't rescue him from the moment. She just watches, breathing slow, waiting. Let me ask you something. Have you ever found yourself feeling again after years of emotional silence? Have you ever been so used to being strong that vulnerability felt almost embarrassing? Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't losing money. It isn't public judgment. It's standing in front of someone who can see you, really see you, and realizing you don't know how to hide anymore. And that's exactly where Adrian Whitmore found himself that night. A man who hadn't felt anything in 10 years, now shaken by the sound of his own heartbeat. If you've ever struggled with trust, or loving again after loss, go ahead and like this video. It may seem small, but it tells YouTube this story matters. And if you're new here, subscribe to Ms. Wink Stories, because we don't just tell love stories. We tell the kind that make you sit back and whisper, that's real. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. Before the rain, before the cameras, before he remembered how to feel. Back to the silence. For 10 years, Adrian Whitmore woke up at exactly 5:30 a.m., no alarm, no sudden jolt, just awareness. His eyes would open slowly to the faint gray light pressing through the heavy drapes of the master suite. The ceiling above him stretched high and distant, carved with quiet elegance. Still, he would lie there for a few seconds, listening, not for anything specific, just listening. The estate was always quiet at that hour. Too quiet, the kind of quiet that almost hums. He would inhale once, deep, controlled, then sit up. Every movement intentional, disciplined. Slippers on the floor, feet into them without looking. The silk robe folded over the armchair exactly where he left it the night before. He would tie it the same way each morning, left over right. Routine was comfort. Routine required no emotion. By 5:40, he would be in the downstairs kitchen. The staff did not arrive until 6. He preferred that window alone. Coffee. Black. No sugar. He didn't taste it anymore if he was honest. He drank it because he always had. At 6 sharp, the housekeeper's car tires would crunch against the gravel outside. At 7, the groundskeeper would begin trimming hedges that never looked different from the day before. By 8, his assistant would call to review the day's schedule. Meetings in New York, investment calls in Chicago, a board discussion in D.C. His voice would remain steady, clear, efficient. No one would ever guess that the most significant part of his morning had already passed. The part where he stared at the ceiling for 10 silent seconds and felt nothing. The master bedroom was designed for 2 people. That was obvious the moment you stepped inside. The bed was massive. King-sized, wide enough to feel almost excessive. Dark wood frame, crisp white sheets. Pillows arranged perfectly by the staff each afternoon. On the right side of the bed, untouched, the indentation where his wife used to sleep had long disappeared. The mattress had regained its shape years ago. But sometimes he still turned his head toward that empty space before closing his eyes. Not because he expected someone there, just habit. Her jewelry box remained inside the dresser drawer. He hadn't moved it. Hadn't opened it either. The air in the room never carried perfume anymore. No faint trace of lavender. No warmth of another body beneath the sheets. When he lay down at night, the bed didn't shift. No weight beside him. No soft exhale in the dark. Only the distant sound of wind against the windows and the subtle ticking of the antique clock near the fireplace. Once, only once, he reached his hand across the mattress in the middle of the night. His fingers met cool cotton. He withdrew immediately, cleared his throat. Ridiculous, he muttered into the darkness, and rolled onto his back. People assumed grief looked dramatic. Tears, isolation, withdrawal. Adrian's grief had been quieter. It arrived one evening and never left. After the funeral, after the condolences, after the final casserole dish was returned to neighbors, something inside him shut down, not shattered, not broken, just dimmed. He still functioned. He still negotiated billion-dollar contracts without hesitation. He still gave speeches at galas about philanthropy and legacy. But joy no longer registered fully. Neither did sorrow. He attended a friend's retirement party once. People laughed loudly. Toasted champagne. Someone made a joke that had the whole room bent over in laughter. Adrian smiled. Polite, measured. He couldn't feel the humor in it. Driving home that night, he gripped the steering wheel slightly tighter. He murmured to himself. Is this permanent? The question hung there. He never answered it, because answering would require hope, and hope required vulnerability. He had already buried one thing he loved. He wasn't volunteering for another loss. There had been women. Of course there had. At his level of wealth, companionship was never difficult to arrange. Dinner dates in Manhattan, private events in Georgetown, soft voices, polished manners, expensive perfume. But whenever a hand reached for his, even casually, something in him recoiled. Not visibly. No one would notice. But inside, a tightening, a hesitation. One woman leaned in to kiss him after dessert once. Slow, confident. He allowed it. He did not respond. Her lips pressed against his, warm and expectant. His hands remained at his sides. She pulled back first. You're distant, she observed gently. I'm tired, he replied. That was the last time he saw her. It wasn't cruelty. It was emptiness. Touch required presence. Presence required feeling. And he had none to give. The estate was beautiful. Guests said so often. Magnificent property, Adrian. Stunning views. Extraordinary craftsmanship. He would nod. Thank you. But beauty requires participation. And he had withdrawn from participation. The terrace overlooked rolling Virginia hills. In autumn, the trees turned deep amber and crimson. In spring, the lawns stretched lush and green beneath open skies. He noticed these things intellectually, registered them, but they did not stir him. Once, during a late evening walk along the property line, he stopped beneath an old oak tree. The air was cool, crisp. He placed his palm against the bark, closed his eyes, waited. Nothing. He exhaled slowly. Well, that settles that. He removed his hand, walked back inside. Years passed like this. Predictable, orderly, muted. No sudden anger, no wild laughter, no longing. The staff respected him. The board admired him. His son called occasionally, conversations cordial but brief. Everything functioned. That was the problem. Everything functioned. Late one night, standing alone in the study, the same room where he would later whisper his confusion after the paparazzi storm, he stared at his reflection in the dark glass. Is this it? He asked quietly. No one answered. His chest did not tighten. His throat did not close. There was no ache, just absence. And absence over time becomes familiar, comfortable even. He adjusted his cufflinks, turned off the lights, climbed the staircase slowly, unaware that somewhere, in Atlanta, a woman named Sanaa Brooks was building a life that would disrupt every controlled breath he had taken for 10 years. He slept that night the same way he had for a decade. Alone, unmoved, unaware that the drought was about to break. It was a Thursday afternoon in early September. The sky above Charlottesville stretched wide and pale blue, streaked lightly with drifting clouds. The gravel driveway of Whitmore Estate curved in a long arc from the iron gates to the stone entrance, lined with trees just beginning to hint at autumn. At exactly 2:17 p.m., a silver sedan rolled to a smooth stop near the front steps. Adrian was already watching from the study window. He hadn't meant to. He had told himself he was reviewing quarterly projections, that the meeting was routine, that this was simply a new consultant recommended by the foundation's board. But when he heard the tires on gravel, he looked. The driver's door opened. She stepped out. Sanaa Brooks, cream blouse, tailored charcoal trousers, structured leather portfolio tucked under one arm. Her curls pulled back loosely, a few strands moving gently in the breeze. She didn't rush, didn't hesitate either. She took in the estate with one steady glance, not wide-eyed, not impressed. Just aware. Adrian straightened slightly near the window. he murmured to himself. No judgment in it. Just observation. She climbed the steps, confidently. Pressed the doorbell once. Firm. Controlled. Inside, the chime echoed faintly. Adrian exhaled once, and walked to answer the door himself. The doors opened slowly. They stood facing each other for the first time. Up close, she was even more composed than he expected. Her skin carried warmth against the pale stone backdrop. Her posture was upright, shoulders relaxed but not submissive. Her eyes met his immediately. Not defiant, not flirtatious. Present. "Mr. Whitmore," she said evenly. "Miss Brooks." A brief pause. Not awkward, measured. He noticed her gaze flicker once past him into the grand foyer, the high ceilings, the sweeping staircase, then returned directly to him. She wasn't scanning the space. She was assessing him. He found that unusual. Most people lingered on the architecture, the art, the scale of it all. She didn't. He noticed the faint scent of something subtle, clean, warm, as the breeze shifted. "You found the place easily?" he asked. "Yes," she replied calmly. "It's hard to miss." There it was. A quiet edge. He almost smiled. Almost. Instead, he stepped aside. "Please." She entered without shrinking. He closed the doors behind her. The sound echoed faintly in the foyer. For a second, just a second, the estate felt less like a monument and more like a space being entered. They moved into the study. Dark oak shelves, leather chairs, a fire not yet lit. Afternoon light filtering through tall windows. Adrian gestured toward a seat. She took it smoothly, placed her portfolio on the desk, opened it without hesitation. "Thank you for meeting with me personally," she began. Her voice carried clarity, no tremble, no overeagerness. The Foundation's expansion into Southern arts initiatives requires cultural alignment, not just financial investment. Direct. He folded his hands lightly. "And you believe we lack alignment?" "I believe," she said carefully, "that impact requires proximity. You can't invest in a community you don't understand." There was no accusation in her tone. Just conviction. He leaned back slightly. "And you understand them. I come from them." The words landed firmly. No elaboration. He studied her more closely now. There was no attempt to charm him. No strategic softness. She wasn't trying to impress. She was trying to be effective. And that unsettled him more than flirtation would have. She stood briefly to spread architectural renderings across his desk. He leaned forward simultaneously. Their hands brushed. It lasted less than a second, but it was undeniable. Warmth. Immediate. Unexpected. She froze for half a breath, not dramatically. Just a tiny intake of air. "Sorry," she said quietly. "Of course." He withdrew his hand first. Too quickly. He felt it, the instinct to create distance. She resumed speaking, pointing to projected budget structures, community ownership models. Her voice remained steady, but something had shifted. The air between them felt closer. He found himself acutely aware of her proximity, the faint movement of her sleeve as she adjusted a document, the quiet rhythm of her breathing when she paused to let a point settle. It wasn't attraction. Not yet. It was awareness. And awareness had been dormant for years. After she left that afternoon, the estate felt oddly different. Not louder, not brighter, just disrupted. Adrian returned to the study desk and looked at the space where her hands had rested moments earlier. He placed his own palm there, as if testing something. "Ridiculous," he muttered softly. He stood, walked toward the window, watched the silver sedan disappear beyond the gates. His chest felt tight, not painful, just active. That evening, at dinner alone in the formal dining room, he found himself replaying small details. The way she didn't over-smile, the way she corrected him without hostility, the way she met his eyes directly. He set his fork down slowly. The sound surprised him. He leaned back in his chair. "This is professional," he said under his breath. "That's all." Yet when he went to bed that night, he did something he hadn't done in years. He lay on his side, facing the door, as if expecting something to enter. He closed his eyes. Sleep did not come as easily. And somewhere in that quiet stretch between wakefulness and rest, something stirred. Not desire, not yet, but the faintest crack in the drought. The drive to Richmond took just over an hour. Adrian insisted on driving himself. No chauffeur, no convoy, just the quiet hum of the engine cutting along Interstate 64, early autumn sunlight stretching across open stretches of Virginia landscape. Sanaa sat in the passenger seat, reviewing notes on her tablet. This center, she explained, glancing at him briefly, used to be a grocery warehouse. Closed 15 years ago. And now? He asked. Now it's a creative hub for local artists, music studios, dance space, after-school programs. Her voice carried a subtle shift when she spoke about it, something warmer, more personal. They pulled into a modest parking lot bordered by brick buildings and colorful murals. The structure itself was sturdy, renovated but not polished to luxury standards. Children's voices drifted faintly from inside. Adrian stepped out of the car and paused. The air smelled different here, lighter, alive. The doors opened before they reached them. A middle-aged woman greeted Sanaa first. There she is. They hugged easily. Not formal, not rehearsed. Sanaa laughed softly. You started without me? Of course we did. You're always late. I'm not late, she protested, smiling. I'm punctual with personality. Adrian stood back slightly, watching. No one approached him first. No one bowed to his presence. For once, he was not the center. And strangely, he didn't mind. Inside, the space pulsed with activity. A group of teenagers rehearsed choreography in one corner. In another, a young man adjusted sound equipment while nodding to a rhythm only he could hear. Sanaa moved through the room with familiarity. She knelt to speak with a girl sketching at a long table. That shading is stronger than last week, she said gently. The girl grinned. You noticed? I always notice. And then it happened. She laughed, not the polite, measured sound she'd used in his study. This was different. Open, unrestrained, her head tilted back slightly, shoulders relaxed. The sound carried across the room, rich and unfiltered. Adrian felt it before he processed it, a tightening in his chest. Not discomfort, something else. He had seen her composed, controlled, professional. He had not seen her light. She glanced toward him briefly, as if remembering he was there, and waved him over. Mr. Whitmore funds the expansion, she told the group. So behave, a teenager smirked. Yes, sir. Adrian nodded once. He wasn't sure what to say. He wasn't used to rooms like this. Rooms where influence wasn't measured in stock prices. And yet, as Sanaa moved from one conversation to another, something inside him shifted. He realized she wasn't performing here. She belonged. Later, during a brief presentation in the main hall, a local musician performed an original piece. The lyrics spoke of rebuilding, of staying rooted, of refusing to disappear. Sanaa stood near the front, arms folded lightly, listening. Her expression softened. She wasn't evaluating. She was absorbing. Adrian stood beside her, hands clasped behind his back. He glanced sideways at her profile. There was a glow in her eyes he hadn't seen in his study. This mattered to her, not the grant approval, not the media coverage, the people. When the song ended, applause filled the room. Sanaa turned to him quietly. This is why alignment matters. Her voice wasn't defensive. It was inviting. He cleared his throat slightly. I see that, and for once, he did, not intellectually, not as an investment, as something living. He watched her hug the musician afterward, speak encouragement into his ear, step back so the spotlight returned to him. No ego, no positioning, just presence. Adrian felt aware again. On the drive back to Charlottesville, the car felt quieter than before. Not awkward, reflective. You're different there, he said finally. She looked out the window for a moment before responding. How? You relax. A faint smile touched her lips. That's home energy. He nodded slowly. Home. The word lingered. He thought of Whitmore Estate, the long hallways, the silent dining room, the master bedroom with one indentation. He thought of her in Richmond, surrounded by voices, music, movement. "You built that," he said quietly. "No," she corrected gently. "We built it. We." He wasn't used to collective language. In his world, leadership was singular. Ownership was singular. Success was singular. Her world felt shared. He pulled into the estate driveway just as the sun began to lower. The stone structure looked the same as it always did. Grand, impressive, still. He parked the car. For a moment, neither of them moved to exit. "Well," she said softly, unbuckling her seatbelt. "Thank you for coming. I should be thanking you." "For what?" He hesitated. "For showing me something I've been funding without seeing." She looked at him then, really looked at him. And in that look, there was recognition, not flirtation, recognition. That evening, after she left the estate once more, Adrian walked through the house differently. He paused in the foyer, listened, not for silence this time, for absence. He stepped onto the terrace. The Virginia air had cooled slightly. He rested his hands on the railing, and for the first time in years he didn't feel neutral. He felt unsettled, not in a threatening way, in a stirring way. He replayed the sound of her laughter in Richmond. It echoed faintly in his memory, unfiltered, alive. He exhaled slowly. "This is dangerous," he murmured. But there was no fear in it, just awareness. He wasn't thinking about touching her. He wasn't imagining closeness. He was thinking about her energy, her conviction, her warmth, and how profoundly different it felt from the carefully maintained stillness of his own life. He stayed on the terrace longer than usual, watching the sky fade from gold to deep blue. Something inside him had shifted again, still subtle, still quiet, but undeniable. The drought had not ended, but somewhere, far beneath the surface, water had begun to move. The ballroom at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, D.C. shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers and polished marble columns. Muted conversation flowed like expensive wine. Politicians, philanthropists, investors, the kind of crowd Adrian navigated effortlessly. He stood near the center of the room in a tailored black tuxedo, speaking to a senator about tax incentives for nonprofit expansion. His tone was even, composed, predictable. Then the entrance doors opened. He didn't turn immediately. He felt it first, a subtle shift in attention around the room, conversations softening just slightly. He glanced toward the doorway, and there she was. Sanaa stepped inside wearing a deep emerald gown that skimmed her frame without excess. Elegant, clean lines, no dramatic embellishment. Her curls styled loosely around her shoulders tonight, catching the light with every step. She didn't rush. She didn't seek attention. But attention followed her anyway. Adrian's sentence faltered mid-thought. "As we finalize the..." He stopped, cleared his throat. "Excuse me." The senator followed his gaze. "Ah," the man said knowingly. Adrian said nothing. He just watched her cross the room. He had seen her in professional attire, structured, focused. This was different. The gown revealed the strength in her shoulders, the natural curve of her posture, the quiet confidence in her stride. His pulse quickened, not dramatically, just enough to disrupt his breathing pattern. He adjusted his cufflinks, once, twice. "Compose yourself," he muttered under his breath. She approached with calm composure. "Good evening, Mr. Whitmore." Her voice carried warmth, but restraint. "Sanaa." He rarely used her first name aloud. Tonight it slipped out before he could correct himself. "You look..." He paused. "Careful. Remarkable." A faint smile touched her lips. "Well, it is a gala." He let out a soft exhale. He was 62 years old. He had negotiated mergers worth billions. Yet standing there he felt, unsteady, aware, alive in a way that unsettled him. He kept his hands behind his back deliberately. Distance, control. Later, after the keynote speeches and applause, the band shifted into softer music. Couples began drifting toward the dance floor. Sanaa stood near a table reviewing a program outline for the next segment. Adrian approached quietly. "Would you care to dance?" She looked up slowly. There was a pause. Not refusal. Consideration. "In front of everyone?" she asked softly. His jaw tightened slightly. "I don't make a habit of hiding." Her eyes searched his face. Then she placed her hand in his. The contact was deliberate, intentional. He guided her to the floor. His hand settled at her waist, firm but measured. Her other hand rested lightly on his shoulder. They began to move, slow, controlled. But beneath the formality, something trembled. He was acutely aware of the warmth of her body through layers of fabric, the steady rhythm of her breathing, the subtle shift of her fingers when she adjusted her grip. His heartbeat felt louder than the music. The room faded slightly around them, not entirely, just enough. Her perfume lingered close, soft, subtle. She tilted her chin up slightly to meet his gaze. They were closer now, close enough that conversation required lowered voices. "You're tense," she observed quietly. He let out a faint breath against her temple. "I'm not accustomed to being aware like this." Her brow lifted. "Aware of what?" He hesitated. "Careful. Of proximity." Her fingers tightened just slightly against his shoulder. Not retreating, not advancing, acknowledging. Their steps slowed further. The music deepened. Her breath brushed faintly along his jawline when she turned her head. It was accidental, but it landed like intention. He swallowed. He murmured without meaning to. The dance floor thinned as couples drifted away. But they remained, still moving, still close. "Adrian," she said softly, her voice barely above the music. "Yes?" "You don't have to grip so tightly." He hadn't realized his hand had tightened at her waist. He eased slightly. "Forgive me." She studied him. "You're afraid of something." The words were quiet, not accusatory. He looked at her fully now. "I'm afraid," he admitted slowly, "of misreading this." "This?" she echoed. He hesitated. The word hung between them. "This shift." She didn't immediately respond. Instead, she let her thumb trace a subtle line against the fabric of his jacket near his shoulder. Small, almost imperceptible. "You're not misreading it," she said at last. A long pause. The music swelled gently. "And that's what unsettles you," she added. He didn't deny it. When the song ended, applause scattered lightly through the ballroom. They stepped apart, but the space between them felt charged. Neither spoke for a moment. He wanted to say more. He wanted to close the distance again. Instead, he stepped back. Professional, measured. "We should return to the program." Her eyes lingered on him. "Yes," she replied softly. They walked back toward the table side by side, not touching, but not entirely separate either. The night continued. Speeches resumed. Applause followed. But for Adrian, something had undeniably shifted. He could still feel the warmth of her hand, still hear the softness in her voice when she said he wasn't misreading it. And for the first time in years, desire flickered, not reckless, not consuming, just present, unavoidable. Pause with me for a second. Have you ever stood that close to someone and felt everything change without a single dramatic gesture? Would you risk your reputation for that kind of awakening? If this tension is building for you the way it is for them, go ahead and like this video right now. It helps this story reach more people who believe love can return at any stage of life. And tell me in the comments, is he handling this with maturity or fear? Now, let's see what happens when tension is no longer contained by music and formal lighting. It was late when they returned to Whitmore Estate. The drive from Washington had been quiet, not strained, just thoughtful. When the car doors closed behind them and the estate doors sealed out the night air, Adrian gestured toward the study. "Would you like something warm?" he asked. "Tea would be fine." He nodded and disappeared briefly into the kitchen. When he returned, the library fire had already been lit by staff earlier in the evening. Flames moved steadily behind the glass screen, casting soft amber light against rows of books. The room felt different at night, more intimate. Shadows stretched across the rug. The air carried faint notes of smoke and aged leather. Sanaa stood near the hearth, palms lightly extended toward the warmth. "You keep it cold in here," she said softly. "I prefer clarity," he replied. She glanced at him. "Clarity doesn't require cold." The fire shifted. A log settled with a muted crack. He set her tea on the small side table. Tonight felt... He stopped. "Different?" She offered. "Yes." The word hung between them. Not dramatic, just undeniable. The estate seemed especially still that night. No distant footsteps from staff. No faint hum of maintenance systems. Just the low rhythm of fire. Sanaa wrapped her fingers around the porcelain cup, steam rising gently against her face. Neither rushed to speak. The silence did not feel empty. It felt heavy, intentional. Adrian stood a few feet away, hands loosely clasped behind his back. A familiar posture, composed, guarded. But his shoulders weren't as rigid as usual. "You handled yourself well tonight," he said finally. "So did you..." A pause. He studied the way the firelight traced the curve of her cheek. She noticed. Of course she noticed. Her breathing shifted slightly. Slower, deeper. "You're staring," she said quietly. He did not deny it. "I am." He took one step closer. Not abrupt, measured. She didn't move, didn't retreat, didn't advance either. Just watched him. "Adrian," she began, then stopped. He waited. "I don't enter things lightly," she continued. "Especially with men who are used to controlling outcomes." His jaw tightened slightly. "I'm not trying to control this." "No," she said softly. "You're trying to contain it." The words landed clean. He exhaled. "Well, perhaps." Another step forward. Now they were close enough to feel warmth through fabric. Close enough that silence amplified everything. He lifted his hand slowly, paused halfway, as if asking permission without words. Her gaze dropped briefly to his hand, then returned to his eyes. The smallest nod. He brushed his knuckles lightly along her jaw. The contact was careful, reverent. He swallowed. "I haven't done this in a long time," he admitted. "Done what?" "Wanted." The word barely escaped him. His thumb traced gently beneath her ear. Her breath caught, not sharply, just enough. He leaned in slightly, not touching her yet. Close enough that their foreheads nearly met. "Tell me to stop," he said quietly. Not dominance, not performance, vulnerability, a real question. Her pulse fluttered visibly at her throat. He saw it. He waited. The fire shifted again, casting moving light across their faces. She inhaled slowly. "If I tell you to stop," she whispered, "would you?" "Yes." No hesitation in that answer. Her lips parted slightly. Silence stretched. Then, "Don't." The word settled between them. Clear, intentional, not impulsive. She reached up and placed her hand lightly against his chest, felt the steady rhythm beneath her palm. "You're not the only one aware of this," she said softly. He exhaled, a sound that carried relief and tension at once. She rose slightly onto her toes, not to reach him fully, just enough to close the final inch of distance. Choice, not surrender. Choice. His other hand moved slowly to her waist, resting there carefully, testing nothing, taking nothing, just holding. The estate, the world beyond it. None of it mattered in that suspended moment. The first contact was almost hesitant. His lips brushed hers gently. A question more than a claim, she responded, not urgently but steadily. The kiss deepened slowly, layer by layer. His hand tightened slightly at her waist, not forceful, just grounding. Her fingers slid upward along his lapel, curling into the fabric. Their breathing shifted in rhythm. Inhale, pause, exhale against each other's skin. He tilted his head slightly, exploring, relearning. There was no rush, no desperation, only discovery. The warmth from the fireplace wrapped around them as if shielding the moment. She pulled back first, not to end it, to look at him. His eyes were different. Open, unfiltered, alive. He rested his forehead gently against hers. For a second, neither spoke. His composure, the one he wore in boardrooms, in negotiations, in public appearances, slipped. Just slightly. "I forgot," he whispered. "Forgot what?" He hesitated. His voice lowered. "What it feels like when something moves through you without permission." She studied him carefully. "You're not losing control," she said. He let out a faint, almost disbelieving breath. "No," he replied softly. "I am." And there it was, not dominance, not conquest. A man who had built his life on precision. Admitting he could not regulate this, he stepped back slowly, though his hands lingered for half a second longer than necessary. "We should—" He stopped. She smiled faintly. "Yes." They didn't finish the sentence. They didn't need to. The moment ended without being resolved, and yet everything had changed. He stood there long after she left the library, touching his lips lightly, as if confirming it had happened, as if confirming he had in fact felt it. The drought had ended, not with a storm, but with a spark. It wasn't planned. That was the first thing that made it real. Sanaa had stayed late at the estate reviewing updated projections for the Richmond expansion. The staff had long since retired to their quarters. The house felt quieter than usual. She stood near the long dining table, gathering papers into her portfolio. Adrian watched her from across the room, not openly, not in a way that demanded attention, but steadily. "You don't have to leave yet," he said softly. She looked up. "I wasn't aware I was rushing." "You're not," he replied. A faint pause. "I just don't want the night to end." The honesty surprised them both. She stepped closer instead of answering. Not all the way, just enough that the air shifted again. His hand lifted almost instinctively, resting lightly at her waist. Not gripping, not pulling, testing presence. She didn't move away. Her fingers traced slowly along his sleeve, feeling the fabric beneath her palm. Breath. Pause. His thumb moved in a small arc against her side. Deliberate, measured, each touch asking without words, each response answering quietly. They didn't rush toward the bedroom. That wasn't the tone. Instead, he led her back toward the library where the fire had been rekindled earlier. The room glowed softly. He removed his jacket first, folded it over the arm of the chair. Then he stepped back toward her. Slowly, as if giving her time to reconsider, his fingers brushed her shoulders, slid down her arms, stopped. "You're certain?" he asked quietly. "Yes." The word wasn't breathless. It was steady. He leaned down, pressing a kiss to her forehead first, not her mouth. Her forehead, reverence before desire. Then his lips moved along her temple, down the curve of her jaw, unhurried. He was relearning the language of closeness, and he did not want to mispronounce a single syllable. When his hands hovered uncertainly at the zipper of her dress, he hesitated. She saw it, reached behind herself, lowered it halfway, then took his hand and placed it there. Her choice, her direction. He exhaled slowly. The sound slipped out before he caught it. She stepped closer, closing the final gap. Her lips found his again. Deeper this time, more certain. He responded, but did not overpower. She guided him backward until the back of his knees met the edge of the sofa. He sat. She remained standing for a moment, studying him. The power dynamic had shifted, and he knew it. She stepped between his knees and ran her fingers through his hair, something no one had done in years. "You're thinking too much," she whispered. "I'm trying not to ruin this." "You won't." She leaned down and kissed him again. Every movement unfolded in conversation, not verbal alone, but physical. He paused when her breath shifted. She slowed when his hands tightened slightly. "Is this all right?" he asked at one point, voice low, rougher than usual. She nodded. "Stay with me," she murmured. "I am." He removed her dress slowly, not tearing, not rushing, as if unveiling something sacred. When she reached for his shirt, her fingers brushed his chest. He inhaled sharply. She noticed, smiled faintly. "Still nervous?" she teased softly. "Yes," he admitted without hesitation. "Good." Her honesty steadied him. Nothing was taken. Everything was offered. Later, when the fire had burned lower and the world outside the estate had long fallen asleep, they lay together on the large sofa, wrapped in a shared blanket. Not tangled, not frantic, just close. Her head rested against his chest. His hand moved slowly along her back, absent-mindedly tracing soft lines. Neither spoke at first. The silence was not heavy. It was full. He stared up at the ceiling, breathing more deeply than he had in years. "I forgot how this feels," he said eventually. She tilted her head slightly. What feels? Being wanted." She shifted slightly, propping herself up on one elbow to look at him. "That's not what this is," she said gently. He frowned slightly. "No? This isn't about being wanted." She placed her hand over his heart. "It's about wanting." The distinction landed deeply. He swallowed, harder than expected. He brushed a curl away from her face. His fingers lingered longer than necessary. "I've been asleep," he said quietly. "For 10 years I've been functioning, performing, surviving." His voice wavered slightly. "But tonight—" He stopped, breathing, searching for the right word. "I feel," he finished softly. The admission wasn't dramatic. It was vulnerable. She studied him carefully. "Feeling is risky," she said. "Yes. And you still want this?" He didn't answer immediately. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead gently against hers. "I don't want to go back to numb." The truth of that settled between them, not as a promise, but as a confession. She kissed him once more, softer this time. Not to ignite, to seal. Outside, the Virginia night remained still, but inside Whitmore Estate, something had fully awakened. Not lust alone, not curiosity, connection, and neither of them could pretend it was casual anymore. It had been her idea to leave the estate. "Somewhere neutral," Sanaa had said earlier that week. "Not your world, not mine." So they drove to a quiet restaurant in Richmond, small, intimate, known for discretion. No grand entrances, no flashing cameras, just candlelight and low conversation. Dinner had been easy, too easy. They talked about nothing monumental, childhood memories, first jobs, music preferences. She told him about her grandmother's Sunday dinners in Atlanta, how nobody was allowed to leave without taking leftovers. He smiled more that night than he realized. At one point she reached across the table and adjusted his napkin absently, like it was the most natural thing in the world. He stilled slightly. She noticed. "You're still getting used to softness," she said gently. He didn't argue. When they stood to leave, the night air outside felt cool against his skin. He placed his hand at the small of her back. Not to display, just instinct. They walked toward the car, quiet, content, and unaware. The first flash came from the left. Blinding. White. Sanaa flinched. Another from the right. Click. 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 Adrian's posture changed instantly. Protective. "Stay behind me," he said low. Voices rose from the darkness beyond the parked cars. "Mr. Whitmore, how long has this been going on? Is she the reason for the Foundation's recent direction? Miss Brooks, are you dating him for influence?" The questions overlapped. Aggressive. He stepped slightly in front of her, shoulders squared. Sanaa didn't hide. She straightened. Chin lifted, but her fingers curled subtly into the fabric of his jacket. The cameras kept firing. The flashes felt endless. He tightened his jaw. "This is private," he said firmly. A reporter laughed lightly. "Nothing about you is private, sir." The driver pulled the car forward quickly. Doors opened. They entered. The cameras continued snapping as the vehicle pulled away. Inside, silence filled the car. Not peaceful silence, heavy silence. Sanaa stared forward, breathing controlled. Adrian stared out the window, calculating. The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. By 6:15 a.m., his phone had already vibrated 5 times. He didn't need to check. He knew. Still, he did. Billionaire's secret romance exposed. Adrian Whitmore steps out with younger consultant. Power or passion? He exhaled sharply. Of course, Sanaa's name appeared in subheadings. Photos captured her mid-step, one of her hand on his jacket, another of him shielding her from the camera. It looked intimate. It was intimate, but stripped of context. He closed his phone slowly. Upstairs, he heard movement. She was still at the estate. He hadn't asked her to leave. She hadn't volunteered. That somehow mattered. By mid-morning, the narrative had spread online. Comment sections filled quickly, some supportive, many not. She's securing her future. Classic midlife crisis. Another rich man falling for youth. Sanaa sat at the kitchen island, scrolling through her own phone. Her expression didn't shift much, but her silence did. Adrian watched from across the room. You don't have to read it, he said carefully. I know. She kept scrolling. A comment caught her attention. Her jaw tightened slightly. He stepped closer. What? She turned the screen toward him briefly. They're questioning my integrity, she said evenly. Not yours. That landed. Harder than he expected. He opened his mouth, closed it. Because the truth was, he was more accustomed to criticism. She wasn't. She placed her phone face down. They don't know me, she said calmly. No, he replied. But they can damage perception. Her eyes lifted slowly to meet his. And what are you afraid of being perceived as? The question caught him off guard. I'm not afraid for myself, he said quickly. I didn't ask that. A pause. He looked away briefly. Well, I don't want this to cost you, he admitted. She studied him. It already might. The words weren't accusatory, just factual. He felt a tightness in his chest. For years, public scrutiny had been background noise. Now it felt sharp, because she was inside it, and he had brought her there. Later that afternoon, his assistant called. There are requests for statements, she said over speakerphone. Do you want to address the relationship publicly? The word echoed. Relationship. He hesitated. Just a second, maybe less. But Sanaa noticed. Yes, he finally said. We'll draft something. After the call ended, she remained standing near the window. You hesitated, she said quietly. He turned toward her. It was logistical. The sound wasn't dismissive. It was disappointed. You've faced harder rooms than this, she continued. Why does naming me publicly require calculation? It doesn't, he said quickly. She held his gaze. Then why did it take you a second? He didn't answer immediately, and in that space, something fragile shifted, not broken, but strained. She nodded slowly. I won't be hidden, she said softly. You won't, he replied. But this time certainty didn't come as easily. Let me ask you something. If you were in her position, would that pause matter? Sometimes it's not the scandal that hurts. It's the half-second where you wonder if the person beside you is fully standing with you. If you're feeling the tension rising here, like this video right now, it helps this story reach more people who understand how fragile trust can be. And tell me in the comments, was his hesitation fear or protection? Because that answer will shape everything that comes next. The change didn't announce itself. There was no argument, no slammed doors, no sharp words. It was smaller than that. Sanaa still stayed at the estate for work meetings, still shared meals with him, still spoke with calm clarity, but something had shifted. She no longer lingered after conversations. When he reached for her hand, she didn't pull away, but she didn't hold on either. Her laughter softened, shortened. One evening he noticed she had moved her things from the guest room she'd been using into a single suitcase. Are you leaving? He asked carefully. She paused. Not exactly. A pause followed. I just need space. The word wasn't heavy, but it landed. He nodded slowly. Well, of course. She gave him a small smile. Not cold, just guarded. And when she walked away down the hall, her steps sounded quieter than before. The house noticed her absence before he admitted it. The mornings returned to silence, not the familiar one, a sharper version. He poured coffee and realized he had made 2 cups. He stared at the second mug for a long moment. Right, he murmured. The library felt colder at night. The sofa where they had shared warmth now looked larger, too large. He walked the halls more than usual. Stopped outside rooms for no reason. Listened for sounds that didn't come. Her presence had rearranged the estate without touching a single thing. Now the rooms felt like they had been reset. Back to function. Back to order. Back to absence. He stood in the master bedroom one night, staring at the untouched side of the bed again. For the first time in years, the emptiness didn't feel neutral. It felt wrong. He sat down heavily on the edge of the mattress, ran a hand over his face. Well, he exhaled quietly. This is familiar. But familiarity didn't bring comfort this time. It happened during a call he barely heard. His assistant was discussing statements, optics, reputation management. Words like timeline and narrative floated past him. He wasn't listening, because his mind had settled on something Sanaa had said days earlier. I won't be hidden. He replayed the moment of hesitation, that half-second pause before answering the question publicly. At the time, he'd told himself it was strategy, protection. Now it sounded like fear. Fear of exposure, fear of loss, fear of feeling too much again. He ended the call abruptly. I'll call you back. The line went silent. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. I almost did it again, he said aloud. The room didn't respond. He had spent 10 years convincing himself numbness was strength. That distance was wisdom. That control meant safety. But Sanaa had entered his life and shown him something else. That connection required risk, and that avoiding risk was just another way of choosing loneliness. He closed his eyes, and for the first time since his wife's passing, the fear wasn't of loss. It was of repeating the same empty survival. He didn't rehearse the conversation, didn't call his assistant, didn't check headlines. He found Sanaa in the garden just before sunset. She was seated on the stone bench near the far oak, reviewing notes. She looked up as he approached. Adrian. Her voice was polite. Careful. He stopped a few feet away. Didn't sit. Didn't reach for her. I need to say something, he began. Then stopped. Inhaled. I don't know how to do this well. She waited. I thought hesitation was protection, he continued quietly. I told myself I was shielding you. He shook his head once. But the truth is, I was afraid. Her eyes softened, not forgiving yet, just listening. I was afraid of losing you, he said, and I didn't realize that fear was already pushing you away. A long pause. He looked at her fully now. I don't want to be careful at the cost of honesty, he said, and I don't want safety if it means going back to numb. His voice lowered. I choose you, publicly, fully. Without pause. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. She studied him for several seconds. Her breath slowed. She closed her notebook gently. Say that again, she said softly. He didn't hesitate this time. I choose you. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was open. And for the first time since the scandal began, the distance between them felt bridgeable. Atlanta felt different the moment he stepped off the plane. Warmer air. Busier energy, voices layered over each other in the terminal. Sanaa walked ahead of him confidently, one hand resting casually in her coat pocket. You don't have to impress anyone, she said without turning around. He almost smiled. I wasn't planning to. She replied lightly. We'll see. Her mother's house sat in a quiet neighborhood lined with mature trees and well-kept lawns, not extravagant, not modest either. Lived in. When the door opened, Her mother stood there with steady eyes and folded arms. "So," she said calmly, looking directly at Adrian, "you're the man who made my daughter trend online." Sanaa winced slightly. "Mom," he stepped forward. "Yes, ma'am," he said evenly, "and I regret the spectacle." Her mother studied him for a long second. Not hostile, evaluating. "Do you love her?" she asked bluntly. No boardroom had ever prepared him for that kind of directness. He didn't deflect. "Yes." A pause. "And do you respect her?" "Yes." "Because loving her without respect won't last." The air thickened slightly. He nodded once. "I understand." Her mother stepped aside. "Then come in." Dinner's almost ready. Inside, the house smelled of seasoned greens and baked cornbread. Family photos lined the hallway. Sanaa as a child, high school graduation, college pictures. He paused at one image. Sanaa standing in front of Spelman College's gates, smiling widely. "She earned every scholarship," her mother said quietly behind him. "Nobody handed her anything." He turned slightly. "I can see that." And for the first time he wasn't saying it to impress. He meant it. The next day she drove him to a smaller community arts initiative she had helped establish years before receiving foundation funding. The building wasn't polished. It wasn't grand. But it was alive. Children practiced spoken word poetry near one wall. A young woman painted a mural depicting local history. Volunteers moved in and out with easy rhythm. "You built this before I ever met you," he said quietly. "Yes, with no Whitmore funding." She nodded. "I've always done the work." He watched her greet people by name. Not titles, not roles. By name. A teenage boy ran up to her, waving a notebook. "Miss Brooks, I got into the writing program." She bent down slightly, eyes bright. "You did?" He nodded vigorously. She pulled him into a brief hug. Adrian felt something shift inside his chest again. This wasn't about him. This wasn't about proximity to wealth. She had impact long before he entered the picture. He stepped back slightly, giving her space to shine. And for once, he did not feel diminished by that. He felt humbled. Later, they sat outside on concrete steps behind the building. The afternoon sun filtered through nearby trees. The hum of Atlanta traffic moved in the distance. "You see why I won't be reduced," she said softly. He nodded. "I do." She studied him. "I've worked too hard to let people assume I attached myself to someone for security. I know. And when you hesitated—" "I know," he repeated gently. She exhaled slowly. "You've had power your entire adult life. I've had to build mine from scratch." The words weren't bitter. They were factual. He leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees. "I've never had to fight assumptions about my integrity," he admitted. "Not like that." She watched him carefully. "And now you're attached to someone who does." He absorbed that. Fully. For years he had navigated wealth without questioning its insulation. Now he was seeing the weight she carried, the scrutiny that came automatically with her identity. "I won't let you stand alone in that," he said quietly. She didn't respond immediately. But her gaze softened, just slightly. That evening, as they walked back toward her mother's house, Adrian slowed his steps. "Sanaa," she looked at him. "I used to think providing was the highest form of love." She waited. "But you don't need providing," he continued. "You need partnership." The admission felt unfamiliar on his tongue, almost fragile. "I don't want to overshadow you," he said. "I want to stand beside you." She stopped walking. The streetlight flickered on above them as dusk settled. "You mean that?" she asked quietly. "Yes." No hesitation this time. He stepped closer, but not to dominate the space, just enough to lower his voice. "You don't make me feel powerful," he said. "You make me feel accountable." Her breath caught slightly. "That's different." He nodded. "I'm learning the difference." For a man who had spent decades leading from the front, learning to walk beside someone required humility, and humility, he realized, was not weakness. It was growth. She reached for his hand. This time she held on, not loosely, not cautiously, firmly, and as they walked the final stretch toward her mother's porch light, Adrian understood something he hadn't considered before. Love wasn't about reviving youth. It wasn't about proving vitality. It was about alignment, respect, choice, and for the first time, he felt worthy of standing in her world, not as a benefactor, but as a man. The event was held at the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. Purposeful venue. Intentional. The Foundation's expansion into community-led arts initiatives was being formally announced. Cameras were expected. Press passes distributed days in advance. This time, the media presence wasn't an ambush. It was scheduled, controlled. Adrian stood behind the podium in a charcoal suit, hands resting evenly on either side. Sanaa stood a few feet away, poised, composed, in a tailored navy dress that carried authority without spectacle. The room hummed with low anticipation. Microphones lined the front table. Flashbulbs tested in advance. He adjusted nothing this time. No cufflinks, no glasses wipe, just breath. "We are here today," he began steadily, "to announce funding for 10 additional community arts centers across southern states." His voice carried strength, but underneath it, there was something softer, something resolved. He spoke clearly about investment, sustainability, community leadership. Then the moderator opened the floor to questions. Hands rose immediately. A reporter in the second row stood. "Mr. Whitmore," she said plainly, "before we move on, there has been considerable public discussion regarding your personal relationship with Ms. Brooks." The room shifted. Sanaa didn't look at him. She kept her gaze forward. "Specifically," the reporter continued, "about the significant age difference and whether it affects professional judgment." The words were clean, sharp, no insult, just directness. A murmur moved through the crowd. Adrian felt it. Not fear, awareness. He glanced once at Sanaa. She remained still, trusting him to respond. He leaned slightly closer to the microphone. There was no pause this time, no calculation. "My relationship with Miss Brooks does not compromise my professional judgment," he said evenly. Then he added, "and my age does not diminish her agency." The room quieted further. He continued, "She is not with me because of influence. She does not require it." His voice deepened slightly. "I am with her because I choose to be. And she chooses me." He didn't look down, didn't adjust his posture. He let the words settle. "For 10 years," he went on, more quietly now, "I believed attachment was strength. I was wrong." A faint stir in the audience. "This relationship is mutual, it is respectful, and it is not hidden. No hesitation, none." The difference from that half-second weeks ago was unmistakable. He turned slightly toward her, not dramatically, just enough. "I stand beside Sanaa Brooks," he said, using her full name deliberately. "Because I admire her work, her integrity, and her leadership." His voice lowered just a fraction. "And because I love her." The last sentence carried through the room without tremor. No theatrics, no raised volume, just truth. Cameras clicked rapidly, but the sound felt distant. He wasn't speaking to them anymore. He was speaking through them. The moderator shifted slightly, unsure whether to move on. Sanaa stepped forward on her own. No prompting. She adjusted the microphone gently. Her voice was calm, clear. "I appreciate the concern about power dynamics," she said evenly. "They are real in many spaces." A few heads nodded. "But I am not here because I was invited into wealth." She glanced at Adrian briefly. "I am here because I built my work long before meeting him." A beat. "And I remain here because I choose to." She did not soften the statement. She did not dramatize it. "I am not overshadowed," she added. "I am partnered." The distinction carried weight. She stepped back slightly, not behind him, beside him. For a moment, no one spoke. The atmosphere changed subtly. The tension that had filled the room at the question's onset began to dissolve. Not entirely, but noticeably. A different reporter raised her hand. "Ms. Brooks," she asked, What impact do you hope this expansion will have on young artists in Atlanta and Richmond? The pivot was clear. The focus returned to the work. Adrian felt something inside him loosen, not relief. Pride, not possessive pride. Respect. As she answered confidently about mentorship programs and sustainable funding models, he watched her without interference. The crowd leaned in, not for scandal, for substance. When the press conference ended and the applause rose, steady, sincere, Adrian leaned slightly toward her. "Did I do all right?" He murmured under his breath. She didn't look at him, but her fingers brushed lightly against his. "You didn't hesitate." A small exhale escaped him. "No," and that, more than any headline, marked the real shift. Not the public declaration, not the applause, the absence of fear, the absence of pause. For the first time since the cameras flashed outside Whitmore Estate in the rain, he stood fully beside her, without retreat, without calculation, without doubt. The estate felt different the night they returned from Washington, not because anything had changed physically. The walls were the same. The floors still echoed softly. The chandeliers still glowed with measured elegance. But the air no longer felt distant. Adrian noticed it first when he unlocked the front doors and stepped aside to let Sanaa enter ahead of him. She paused just inside the foyer, smiled faintly. "Your house doesn't feel like it's holding its breath anymore," she said quietly. He closed the doors behind them. Neither spoke for a moment. The silence wasn't sharp. It was settled. He removed his coat and draped it over the chair without precision. She placed her bag down without lining it up perfectly. Small things, human things, and somehow those details warmed the space more than any fire ever had. Later in the living room, Adrian crossed to the console near the fireplace and hesitated. "Well," he said softly, glancing back at her. "This may be outdated." She lifted an eyebrow. "Try me." He turned the dial gently. Music filled the room, low, smooth, unhurried. Not loud, not dramatic, just present. She walked closer, drawn by the sound. The fire crackled quietly. Outside, the night settled deep across the Virginia grounds. Inside, warmth gathered. Not rushed, not forced, earned. He extended his hand. An invitation, not a claim. She took it. They didn't speak as he guided her into the center of the room. No audience, no press, no tension waiting to strike. Just them. They moved slowly. No choreography, no structure. Just instinct. Her head rested lightly against his chest. His hand settled at her back. Not tight, not loose. Certain. They swayed gently. Time stretched. He closed his eyes briefly. Exhaled. The sound slipped out of him unconsciously. She felt it and smiled. "You're here," she murmured. "Yes," he replied. "I am," and he meant it, fully. When they finally stopped moving, neither stepped away immediately. His fingers traced the familiar line of her shoulder, slow, intentional. She tilted her face up toward his. Their kiss this time wasn't searching. It wasn't tentative. It was calm, confident, layered with everything they had already survived together. He didn't grip her as if afraid she'd disappear. She didn't test his resolve. They simply stayed connected, foreheads touching, breath sinking. "I don't need you to save me," she said softly. "I know," he replied. "I don't need you to prove anything." "I know." He kissed her again, gentle, assured. Not hunger, commitment. The kind of intimacy that comes when fear no longer leads. Later, sitting together on the sofa, her legs folded beneath her, his arm resting easily along the back, Adrian stared into the fire. "For 10 years," he said quietly, "I thought feeling nothing meant I was strong." She listened. "But numbness didn't protect me," he continued. "It just delayed living." He looked at her. "And you didn't come into my life to make me feel young." She met his gaze. "You came to make me honest." She smiled softly. "And you stayed," she replied, "because you chose courage over comfort." That was the lesson. Love does not arrive to complete you. It arrives to confront you. Strength is not distance. Power is not control. And healing does not come from avoiding pain. It comes from choosing truth. If this story moved you, if you felt the slow build, the fear, the choice, go ahead and like this video. It helps stories like this reach people who believe love can still grow after loss. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that it's never too late to feel again. And if you haven't already, subscribe to MZ Wink Stories, because here we don't just tell love stories. We tell the kind that breathe, pause, and stay with you long after the screen fades. Some hearts don't need rescuing. They need permission to feel. And sometimes that's enough.